Welcome to Life Confusions TV. Try to relax and feel the story.
When I was 18, my parents told me something that completely changed my life. Emma, you need to leave. My name is Emma Caldwell, and until that moment, I believed I had a normal family. We lived in a quiet suburb outside Denver. My father, Robert Caldwell, worked in real estate. My mother, Linda Caldwell, stayed home and managed everything around the house. Growing up, they always talked about responsibility and independence. But I never thought that lesson would come like this. It was a cold October evening when they called me into the living room. I still remember the smell of coffee and the way my mother folded her hands like she was about to deliver bad news. My father cleared his throat. "Emma," he said, "you're an adult now. It's time for you to learn how the real world works." I thought they were going to talk about college. Instead, my mother said something I never expected. "You need to move out." At first I laughed. I thought it was some kind of joke. But no one else laughed. "You're serious?" I asked. My father nodded. "You have 2 weeks." 2 weeks. That was all the time they gave me to leave the only home I had ever known. I didn't have savings. I didn't have a full-time job. And the worst part? My parents weren't struggling financially. In fact, they were doing pretty well. My father had just closed a large property deal, and my mother was constantly redecorating the house. But according to them, this was about building character. "You'll thank us later," my mother said. I didn't thank them. 2 weeks later, I packed my clothes into 2 suitcases and left. No emotional goodbye. No help. Just silence. And that was the moment I realized something important. I was completely on my own. The first year on my own was brutal. I rented a tiny basement room from an older woman named Mrs. Harper. The place barely had enough space for a bed and a small desk. The rent was $650 a month, which might not sound like much now. But when you're 18 and working minimum wage jobs, it feels like a mountain. During the day, I worked at a coffee shop. At night, I cleaned offices. Sometimes, I slept only 4 hours. There were weeks when I had to choose between groceries and paying the electricity bill. Meanwhile, my parents continued living their comfortable life. I knew because my mother posted pictures online. New furniture, weekend trips, dinner parties. Not once did they ask if I was okay. Not once did they offer help. Eventually, I stopped expecting it. Instead, I focused on surviving. And slowly, surviving turned into something more. After 2 years of juggling jobs, I enrolled in night classes for business and marketing. It took time. A lot of time. But eventually something changed. One of my professors introduced me to the world of online startups. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then I started helping a small company with their marketing campaigns. I worked harder than anyone else there. Not because I loved marketing, but because I remembered those nights when I couldn't afford groceries. And I promised myself something. I would never be that powerless again. By the time I turned 27, my life looked completely different. I had become the marketing director of a fast-growing tech startup called BrightLaunch. The company was founded by a brilliant but chaotic entrepreneur named Daniel Pierce. Daniel had great ideas, but he needed someone who could actually turn those ideas into profit. That someone became me. For 3 years, I worked like my life depended on it. Because in many ways it did. Late nights, endless meetings, product launches that almost failed, campaigns that barely worked. But slowly, the company started gaining attention. Investors came in. Our user base exploded. And one morning, Daniel walked into my office with a grin. "We have an offer," he said. A big one. A large technology company wanted to buy BrightLaunch. The offer was $2.3 million. I sat there in silence. Because when the deal closed, my share of the company would change my life forever. The acquisition happened 6 months later. When the paperwork was finished, Daniel called me into the conference room. He slid a document across the table. "That's your payout," he said. I looked at the number. After taxes and everything else, my share was just over $480,000. I stared at the number for a long time. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I remembered something. The tiny basement room, the $650 rent, the nights I skipped meals, all those years when I felt like I was barely surviving. And now, everything had changed. The first thing I did wasn't buy a luxury car or a designer bag. Instead, I bought something small, a quiet apartment. Nothing fancy, just a place that was truly mine. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. But I had no idea that my past was about to walk right back into my life. About 2 months after the acquisition, I received a message from someone I hadn't heard from in almost 10 years. My mother, Linda Caldwell. The message was surprisingly short. "Emma, we need to talk. It's important." I stared at my phone for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part of me was curious. Eventually, I agreed to meet them. We met at a restaurant downtown. When I walked in, my parents were already sitting at a table. They looked older, but not much had changed. My mother still wore expensive jewelry. My father still had that confident posture, the kind that comes from never really struggling. My mother smiled when she saw me. "Emma, you look wonderful." I sat down slowly. "Why did you want to meet?" My father leaned forward, and then he said something that almost made me laugh. "We heard about your company." Of course they had. News of the acquisition had spread locally. "We're proud of you," my mother said. I didn't respond, because I knew that tone. And then the real reason came out. My father sighed heavily. "We're in a difficult situation." Apparently, their finances had collapsed. A few bad investments, some real estate deals that went wrong, and now their house was about to be taken by the bank. "We need help," my mother said quietly. Then my father said the number. "We need $150,000 to save the house." The same house I was kicked out of at 18. The same house they told me I needed to leave so I could learn how the real world works. They looked at me with hopeful expressions, like they expected me to simply agree. After all, we were family, right? But they forgot something. Family is supposed to be there when things are hard. And when things were hardest for me, they had closed the door. Literally. Still, I stayed calm. "I'll think about it," I said. They both looked relieved, but they had no idea what I was actually thinking. That night, I did something unexpected. I didn't send them money. Instead, I started researching their house. It turned out their situation was even worse than they admitted. The bank had already started foreclosure proceedings, meaning the house would soon go to auction. And when a property goes to auction, anyone can buy it. That's when an idea started forming in my mind. A very interesting idea. Over the next few weeks, I quietly followed the situation. My parents continued messaging me, asking if I had decided, telling me time was running out. I always replied the same way. "I'm still thinking." Meanwhile, the foreclosure date was scheduled. The house would be auctioned. And on the day of the auction, I showed up. The auction room was surprisingly quiet. Just a handful of investors and property buyers. Most of them were experienced in these kinds of deals. To them, it was just another investment opportunity. But for me, it was something else entirely. The bidding started lower than I expected. Apparently, the house needed renovations, which meant fewer buyers were interested. When the bidding slowed down, I raised my hand. The room turned toward me. Within minutes, it was over. The house was sold. To me. For $162,000. I signed the paperwork calmly, but inside, I felt something strange. Not anger, not revenge, just closure. Because now the house belonged to me. The same house I was once told to leave. A week later, my parents received a letter. Not from the bank, from the new owner. Me. They called me immediately. "Emma, what is this?" my mother asked. Her voice was shaking. I explained it simply. The house went to auction, and I bought it. Silence filled the line. Finally, my father spoke. "You're joking." "I'm not." They couldn't believe it. The daughter they kicked out, the one they told to struggle on her own, now owned their house. My father's voice hardened. "So, what happens now?" I paused for a moment. Then I said something very calm. You have 60 days. 60 days to move out. For the next few weeks, I heard nothing from them. No angry messages. No attempts to argue. Just silence. Eventually, the 60 days passed, and they moved out. I never went back to that house. Not because I was avoiding it, but because I didn't need to. The point had already been made. The world they forced me to face alone was the same world that eventually gave me the power they never expected. Sometimes people think revenge is loud,
Dramatic.
explosive. But sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply this: living a life so successful that the people who doubted you have to watch from the outside. And that's exactly what happened. My name is Emma Caldwell, and the house I was once forced to leave now legally belongs to me. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments. And if you like stories about betrayal, family drama, and unexpected revenge, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the next confession might be even more unbelievable.